The revelation of the revelation. The four Gospels explained by their writers by Jean-Baptiste Roustaing, 1881. Source: www.tinyurl.com/the four Gospels. Prediction of the birth of John. Luke, chapter 1, verses 5 to 25.
There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias, of the course of Abia, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elisabeth, and they were both righteous before God, walking in all the ordinances and the commandments of the Lord blameless. And they had no child, because Elisabeth was barren, and they were both advanced in age. And it happened that while he was officiating as a priest before God, in the order of his course according to the custom of the priesthood, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord, and the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the time of incense. And there appeared unto him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him, and the angel said unto him, Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elisabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John, and he shall be to thee joy and gladness, and many shall rejoice at his birth. For he shall be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink, and he shall be filled with the Holy Spirit even from his mother's womb. And he shall turn many of the sons of Israel to the Lord their God. And he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. And Zacharias said to the angel, Whereby shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. And the angel answering, said to him, I am Gabriel who stand in the presence of God, and am sent to speak unto thee, and to announce this good news to thee. And behold, thou shalt be dumb, and not able to speak until the day when these things shall come to pass, because thou didst not believe my words, which shall be fulfilled in their due season. And the people waited for Zacharias, and wondered that he tarried so long in the temple. And when he came out, he could not speak to them, and they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple, for he beckoned unto them, and remained speechless. And it came to pass that when he had completed the days of his ministration, he departed to his own house. And after those days, his wife Elisabeth conceived, and hid herself 5 months, saying, Thus hath the Lord dealt with me in the days wherein he looked on me, to take away my reproach among men.
Section 2. The birth of John was intended to arrest public attention from the first. Elisabeth remained childless until it became part of her mission to become the mother of John. Her barrenness does not mean that she had passed the age of childbearing fixed by the laws of your planet, but merely that she had hitherto been childless, as is implied by the expression applied to Elisabeth by the angel in speaking to Mary, verse 36, she who is called barren. Every occurrence in human life springs from causes antecedent to your present existence, for any fault committed in a previous incarnation must be followed by its natural consequences. Man is born and dies many times before arriving at the state of perfection which allows him the full enjoyment of his spiritual faculties when he has attained to perfect love and charity, and the knowledge of God and his works. He will then perceive the unveiled truth in the physical world, whether material or fluidic, and in the spiritual world, whether moral or intellectual, having acquired the knowledge of all that lives, moves or exists in the immensity of creation. When the spirit has attained to the culminating point of sidereal perfection, the vastness of creation still expands eternally before him, to be explored forever in the pursuit of universal science. Each succeeding existence is linked to those which have preceded it, and it frequently happens that spirits who have not been guilty of great crimes, accept missions on your earth, and, at the same time, accept also a chain of events which must be accomplished, but which cause them much suffering in their incarnate state. Thus Elisabeth, being one of those spirits who desired to take part with Jesus in his work of regeneration, had accepted the lot of a barren woman, which was a reproach among the Jews, in order to render the birth of John more remarkable, and Zacharias had likewise consented to live childless. Although they had forgotten these obligations when incarnated, they had nevertheless undertaken them, and were bound by their consequences. Do not imagine that each individual plant, or organized being has an attendant spirit specially appointed to watch over its reproduction. Spiritual agency exists indeed, but it operates in a general manner. The fluids surrounding you are distributed according to the needs of the plant rooted in the soil, or the man seeking to raise himself towards heaven, and the birth of each new being takes place only at its appointed period. If the pollen falls on a flower at a period unsuitable for fructification, it remains sterile, and so in other cases. In the case of plants and animals, reproduction takes place at definite periods regulated by general laws. In the case of man, however, you have been taught that the spirit itself chooses the experiences of its future life. It does not construct its own body, but before being incarnated, it asks for a body suited to the experiences which it is about to undergo. It is consequently the will of the spirit which attracts or rejects the needful elements prepared by the spirits entrusted with the formation of material bodies generally, who combine and condense the animal substances into bodies, and thus play their part, according to general laws, in the actions of incarnate spirits, in order that these bodies should be suited to the kind of experiences selected by those who are about to be incarnated amid the varying circumstances of human life. When the spirit is about to continue its experiences, it asks either for material fecundity, or persistent sterility throughout its existence, or for temporary sterility or fecundity, at periods determined by the character of its desired experiences. Hence the spirit attracts or repels the principles needful for the character of its experiences from the very first, and, consequently, undesired births may take place, or persons may remain childless in spite of the wishes of the incarnate spirit. In such cases, spirit influence only exists in the sense that the results spring from the desire of the spirit at the time when it selected its experiences. As soon as the body is fitted for the experiences which await the spirit who is about to inhabit it, the guardian spirits limit their action to a general supervision, and allow each experience to run its course in the order of events, for the fluids have now received their determinate direction. When a spirit who has chosen to experience temporary sterility accepts its body, it repels the principles requisite for fecundity for a given time, after which it attracts them, according to the nature of the experiences which it has chosen, under the supervision of the guardian spirits. Thus, Zacharias, the husband of Elisabeth, had often prayed to God to take away the reproach from his house, and to give him a male child. But Elisabeth had asked for temporary barrenness, as part of her mission, and consequently she remained childless until the time appointed. Humanly speaking, the prayer of Zacharias was answered, and from a spiritual point of view, the trial of sterility had ceased, for John was born. Zacharias was, unknown to himself, a seeing and hearing medium, which explains his seeing and conversing with the Spirit. He was condemned to silence, not because he doubted the truth of what he had heard, but in order that this temporary infirmity might serve to corroborate the reality of the prediction. He who reserves his opinion on what is unknown to him, is wise. We must call your special attention to the words of the angel concerning Elisabeth. They were afterwards repeated and confirmed by public opinion. In truth, Elijah was John, and John had been Elijah. When highly exalted spirits desire to elevate mankind, they often assume a form which appears mean in the eyes of men in regard to social conditions, and their devotion can manifest itself in all situations. The great spirits of the Lord manifest themselves either by incarnations or apparitions according to their degree of elevation, and their spiritual nature. Such manifestations are rare, but there are certain periods when they are necessary, both on your planet and on others. There are many planets higher than yours, where more advanced spirits still require to have their aspirations after the good and the beautiful rekindled when they grow feeble. In future, you may recognize the rank of such a spirit by his conduct as a man. His life will be spotless, and the love of God and the neighbor will regulate all his actions, and govern all his thoughts. His childhood will be gentle, exhibiting none of those evil tendencies which usually appear in children. His youth will be laborious, and all material instincts will be subjugated by the love of work and progress. His manhood will be blameless, unsoiled by any abuse or excess, and his old age will be worthy of all veneration as the reflection of a life that has been blameless in the sight of heaven. He will be indulgent towards all weaknesses, will lend his aid and support to all human deficiencies, and will wait patiently for the hour of his deliverance. By these signs, O beloved friends, you may perceive that a superior spirit has descended among you, to give a fresh impetus to human progress. Section 3. It has been authoritatively asserted that human science can terminate sterility by an appropriate regimen. Do not some patients die notwithstanding medical aid, while others recover? Why is this? Because one has reached his appointed term, while the other has not yet finished his career. Has not the treatment which, humanly speaking, has proved successful in one case of sterility failed in another? Why so? Because the sterility of one patient has reached its term, while that of the other is destined to continue either through life, or till it is removed by change of conditions and circumstances. Do not suppose that there is any fatalism or predestination in these cases, but attribute them entirely to the choice and duration of experiences. Birth and death are alike regulated by the immutable laws of nature according to universal harmony. The moment of death is only inevitable when man has reached the limit which these laws have fixed as the irrevocable end of human life, beyond which man's free will is powerless to extend it, but this free will can arrest the course of life at some definite period between birth and this natural limit, which, in fact, is but seldom attained. Life is generally terminated sooner, either on account of the resolutions made by the Spirit before incarnation respecting the selection, duration, and termination of experiences, and the length of life, or by the use and abuse which men make of their earthly existence. Within these limits it is thus left to your free will to close your life at a definite period, conformably with the laws of nature, either by the choice of experiences in the spiritual state before incarnation, or by your actions during your earthly existence. Thus, when a man dies, notwithstanding medical treatment, he dies either because his time has come, or because he has reached the natural period of human life, or because he has reached the limit to which his use of his free will has restricted him. In the first case, he dies conformably with the determination of his spirit before incarnation. In the second, his life has reached the longest term allowed by the good use which he has made of his earthly existence, and in the third, he has either made a bad use of his life or has neglected the precautions needful to enable his body to last till the end of his experiences. What is said above respecting the moment of death is fully explained in the section on the fifth commandment of the Decalogue, and should be read in connection with it. In the case of birth, nothing is inevitable except the times and conditions fixed for its occurrence by the natural laws of your planet. But the free will of man or woman may form a temporary or permanent obstacle to birth, by the resolutions of the Spirit before incarnation. They may then either avoid the operation of the laws entirely, when they have chosen to experience permanent sterility during life, or for a time only, conformably to the previous determinations of the Spirit, and to favorable circumstances. Thus, when a barren woman has become a mother, humanly speaking, in consequence of medical treatment, it is because she had resolved, before incarnation, that her sterility should be only temporary, and it has terminated as arranged beforehand. But the treatment fails in other instances, when a woman has resolved before incarnation that her sterility should be permanent, or when the time and circumstances fixed for its cessation have not yet arrived. Your science cannot effect anything in your material life which is contrary to the laws of nature and incarnation, or to the selection and duration of experiences. If a spirit has chosen to experience permanent sterility, nothing can terminate it. But if it has resolved either to remain barren or become fertile, according to circumstances, or to its own deserts, its human future may become modified. For example, a spirit may have neglected its duties as the father or mother of a family, and have firmly resolved to repair the wrong which it has done. But it is unwilling to take the responsibility upon itself without being certain of possessing the needful perseverance, or else it has desired to be condemned to wait for a time, that the birth of the long-desired child may make it still more precious. In such a case, it will depend on the resolution and progress of the Spirit itself, whether it will become apparent, and it is then enabled to adopt means which may effect the accomplishment of its desires. It is only in such a case as this, that science may assist the spirit to gain its end, when its acts or surrounding circumstances, acting independently of its external wishes, but conformably with its spirit resolutions, combine to terminate its barrenness, by aiding in the development of the material conditions necessary to fruitfulness. And although sterility would then cease without the aid of science, the study of these conditions is nevertheless useful. Do not imagine that the researches of science are valueless, for science is one of the agents employed to further the designs of providence. The researches of science will result in man's discovery of facts previously regarded as secrets or mysteries of nature, and thus those who have chosen various experiences enable it in the course of time and progress to confirm the results and conquests to which it has attained. You are now prepared to understand that the mystery of generation will one day be understood, but only by experimental study and perseverance. If you would make these researches easy, encourage those who desire to mitigate the sufferings of the incarnate spirits, whose mission it is to furnish opportunities for these studies, and thus will unhoped for successes encourage those who are engaged in these profound researches. In the course of the purification of your planet and its humanity, man will finally succeed in acquiring a knowledge of the fluidic combinations which compose matter. He will be able to materialize the fluids like a new Prometheus, but, being more prudent and submissive, will not attempt to animate them, leaving to the Creator the task of vivifying them. Do not misunderstand us, we do not tell you that man will be able to manipulate the fluids at will, so as to condense them, and construct material bodies like yours, as the potter molds the clay into an image of himself, but that he will be enabled to comprehend, regulate, and attract to himself the fluids and await the result in the formation of bodies. This is the case in higher planets than yours, where the needful fluids are drawn together only by a double and uniform thought, and this will take place in your planet also when it has reached the same degree of elevation. Section 4. What is the exact import of the words dictated respecting the doubt felt by Zacharias? He is a wise man who reserves his judgment about what is unknown. It is prudent not to adopt every new idea blindly, or to accept all maxims as good which are preached to you with more or less eloquence. It is needful to examine every new idea carefully, not with the bodily eyes, but with those of the mind, and to comprehend, not with the ears of the body, but with those of the spirit. Man should reason and study, and take everything into consideration, and we therefore thought it needful to explain that Zacharias was not struck dumb because he doubted. He merely requested a proof that the vision was not a delusion, or hallucination of his own mind, and he consequently received a proof, and not a chastisement. Could God hold a man criminally responsible for his ignorance? Section 5. How must we understand the words of Zacharias? Verse 18, How shall I know the truth of what you tell me, for my wife and I are old, in connection with the angel's reply, verses 19 and 20, because you did not believe in my words, which shall be fulfilled in due season. Zacharias simply asked for a proof, without either doubting or denying, but his asking for a proof implied that he did not believe that the event would really happen, solely on the authority of the announcement. Section 6. How are we to understand that the angel's words respecting John were subsequently repeated and confirmed by public opinion? The Jews generally considered that John was Elijah who had returned among them, and it was on this account that John was questioned on the subject in the course of his mission, and that Jesus repeated the words of the Pharisees to his disciples. Are we to understand verse 17 to imply that the spirit of Elijah was about to be reincarnated in the child of Elisabeth and Zacharias? Most certainly. Was it not intended that this hidden sense should only be fully explained at a later period as involving the principle and consequences of the law of reincarnation? Yes, but this hidden meaning was contained in it from the first. Section 7. How are we to understand that the form assumed by exalted spirits, who desire to aid humanity, often appears mean to men, according to human prejudices? You have only to consider the position of Jesus in the eyes of the world. What was his social position, and what was that of his faithful and zealous disciples and apostles? O men, do you not still find examples of touching devotion among those whom you regard as belonging to the most degraded classes? And do you not sometimes find among them a nobility of soul which your pride would desire to behold only among those whom you call the higher classes, whereas, shame upon them, it is generally among these that you find the least? Section 8. What is meant by the words, "He will drink neither wine nor strong drink"? Men devoted to the service of God were restricted to a certain course of life, among which was the obligation of abstaining from spirituous or fermented beverages. The Hebrews frequently dedicated a firstborn child to the Lord, especially when they had long desired one, just as many mothers among yourselves dedicate their children to the Virgin. Please explain verse 15, "He shall be filled with the Holy Spirit from his mother's womb." Spirit teachings have already informed you that when the Spirit is about to incarnate itself anew, to pass through fresh experiences, it suffers greatly from anxiety as to the result, and these sufferings increase till the moment of birth, and continue, though gradually decreasing, during the first period of material infancy. After a spirit has expiated its faults, by appropriate moral sufferings in the errant state, it is necessary for it to repair the past. It chooses the experiences which it thinks most fitting for its advancement, but these experiences always appear terrible to it, and it feels its weakness in the past so acutely that it mistrusts its strength in the future. Then begins the trouble and anxiety of which we spoke. It is definite at first, but afterwards increases in intensity, and lessens in clearness in proportion as the material body in course of formation drags the spirit nearer and nearer to its prison, with which it is connected by a fluidic link, which binds it from the moment of conception. As soon as it is born, the spirit is completely linked to the body, and is no longer able to separate from it. It then commences its experiences, and undergoes the sufferings designed to alter its character. It no longer feels the anxiety of the first moments, in consequence of its senses being deadened by matter until this matter has become sufficiently developed to allow the spirit gradually to regain a relative liberty. Do you suppose that it can be the same in the case of a purified spirit who assumes this fleshy covering only as one might assume a uniform to enable him to serve his country better? In such a case the spirit endures the trammels of the flesh with joy, and as long as the links between the body and the spirit are not tightened, he is free to survey the greatness of the work committed to his charge, and the confidence which his master has shown in him, and his joy is great. He is not entirely subjected to the yoke of the flesh from the earliest period, but preserves a certain amount of independence. He suffers no preliminary anxiety, but only from the torpor occasioned by matter at the moment of birth, when the body contracts the spirit, until it gradually becomes sufficiently developed to allow the spirit to recover a relative amount of liberty. John was filled with the Holy Spirit from his mother's womb, that is, being a very elevated spirit, he attracted his equals and superiors around him. Section 9. What is meant by the Holy Spirit? During the Hebrew period, and at the time of the earthly mission of Jesus, it was a familiar expression, and implied both the manifestation of God himself by any act, and the divine inspiration, the breath of God himself. When they wished to express that a man was inspired by God, they said he was filled with the Holy Spirit, or the Holy Spirit was in him, or he was driven by the Spirit, or he was moved by the Spirit of God. This expression was also used in speaking of Jesus, in accordance with the ideas of the time and people. They took him for a man like themselves, and were ignorant of his nature and origin, and they were consequently unable to understand how he could be so superior to all human weakness, without being filled with the Holy Spirit, or inspired by God, like the prophets. In times subsequent to the mission of Jesus, and according to the Catholic Church, the Holy Spirit was regarded as an individual part of God himself. They considered God to be the supreme intelligence, ruling over mankind. One fraction had assumed the human form, and had descended visibly among men, another fraction was the intelligence and divine inspiration which was communicated to men, and inspired them, and which required to assume a material form to become visible to their eyes. These false interpretations were based upon a mixture of Hebrew and pagan notions, which were partially theistic, combined with a confused recollection of Spiritist ideas of which some traces had been preserved by tradition, and interpreted by the imagination of men according to their necessities. From the Spiritist standpoint, and according to the true teaching laid open to all by the new revelation, the Holy Spirit was not, and is not, an individual spirit, but is a figurative expression representing the totality of pure, superior, and good spirits. This sacred phalanx is the instrument and minister of God, and is one and indivisible in the hierarchy of moral and intellectual elevation. It is eternal and infinite, and sheds its light everywhere, without ever being divided. The pure spirits alone receive inspiration and direction immediately from God, which they transmit to the superior spirits, through whom it descends to the good spirits, according to the degrees of the spiritual scale, and lastly to you. This holy company executes and superintends the inspiration and will of God in the physical, intellectual and moral universe, according to immutable and eternal laws. It watches over organization, the functions and fulfillment of life, and the universal harmony and progress in space of the more or less material or fluidic worlds, throughout the whole universe. It watches over all spirits who are gifted with free will, whether they are errant, incarnated, or otherwise incorporated, as well as over all other beings, in all the kingdoms of nature. This sacred phalanx is the true providence of God, who is the Father of all which exists, and it manifests His justice, goodness, and infinite mercy throughout the spiritual worlds in space, and in all the planets according to their various degrees of moral and intellectual elevation. Thus, such expressions as filled with the Holy Spirit imply to be aided, inspired or guided by the spirits of the Lord, whom every incarnate spirit attracts to himself according to the degree of his moral and intellectual elevation, and the nature and importance of the mission or the work which he has to accomplish. Jesus was a perfect spirit, and pure among the purest of those who work under his guidance to forward the destiny, development, and progress of your planet and its humanity, and direct their course. The origin of his purity and perfection rests in the obscurity of past eternities, but he is the protecting and ruling spirit of your planet, and your master and ours. He did not act under any external influence, but by the power of his own will, but it might be said that he was driven by the Spirit, in the sense that his elevation and purity enabled him to approach the source of omnipotence, and thus to receive direct divine inspirations. Section 10. Did the angel appear to Zacharias, verse 11, in a human form, as the Hebrews represented? Yes, the Hebrews pictured the angels to themselves as clothed in white, and illuminated by rays flowing from an invisible source. They sometimes added wings, to teach the people that they could traverse space. The apparitions which have appeared at different ages and at different times, have always obeyed the same law, by the Spirit assuming that form which was best fitted to arrest the attention of the seer, or to remind him of what he desired to present to his sight. Section 11. What is the meaning of the words, verse 11, I am Gabriel, who stand in the presence of God? These words do not imply that the Spirit was always in the presence of God, like a human minister who awaits the orders of a king. He was one of those exalted spirits who are the messengers of God, and consequently in constant communion with him. The divine inspiration flowed to the Spirit as that of your guardian angel flows to you, allowing for the difference of spiritual natures and relationships. Section 12. How did Zacharias become dumb? By fluidic action directed by the will of the angel. There is a spiritual magnetism resembling human magnetism, and thus the tongue of Zacharias was weighed down with fluids which caused a kind of temporary paralysis, just as the magnetizer acts upon the limb of a subject when he wishes to render it immovable. Magnetism, which you still understand very imperfectly, is a property of our nature, and your fluids act more or less powerfully according as they are more or less impeded or altered by the action of the flesh. In the Spirit, the fluids act freely, and you are more or less susceptible to our influence according to your degree of materiality, just as the subject is more or less impressionable, or clairvoyant under the influence of his magnetizer. This explanation is sufficient to explain the nature of all reputed miracles, and it is for you to apply it in special cases. Section 13. Why did Elisabeth hide herself for 5 months? Verse 25, when the reproach of her barrenness, according to Hebrew prejudices, had been removed. As an act of humility, and thus to prolong the reproach which rested on her by her own free will. The revelation of the revelation. The four Gospels explained by their writers by Jean-Baptiste Roustaing, 1881. Source: www.tinyurl.com/the4gospels.